Welcome to Sharps Point South, the home of the Sail Power Steam Museum, world famous Sail Power Steam Museum. This is South Rockland's finest maritime museum. I guess you know that by now. And we're here. We're going to have a great program tonight on the old Schooner Roseway. The Roseway and her 4 different lives. She had 4 different lives during her career, and she's only 4 years from that centennial. In 4 years, she's going to be 100 years old. Can you believe it? Isn't that just absolutely amazing? Well, it's going to be a long program tonight, but first I want to start out telling you just a little bit about what we did last summer. And also I want to mention to you that this program is being sponsored in part by the Camden National Bank. And we thank them very much for their share in this, putting on these Zoom programs. We get a big kick out of it. Anyway, the museum has been growing and growing and growing the last 10 years. My wife and I, we started this museum. Here's my wife right behind me, Meg. We started this museum, and it's really been quite a successful thing. We're right chock-a-block full now. We're so full that we finally said we've got to have more space somehow. So we thought, well, we'll see if we can't build another building. We have a lot of antique boats and things. So we got an architect to make this rendering for us. This is the building we intend to build. We already have the foundation in. We did that in the fall, and we're going to continue on next spring and build this over the summer so that by the end of the summer, it should be finished. You can see it's a boathouse, has a whole lot of garage doors there. The big one over on the right-hand side is for our steamboat. We have a 40-foot stern wheeler, big stern wheeler steamboat with a calliope on the top deck, a wood-burning boiler in it, and really quite a showpiece. And these other doors are the ones in the middle there. We're going to have Friendship sloops, Muskanga sloops. We're going to have our Harrishoff 12.5. So we got 2 of those. We've got 2 antique Beetle Cats. And even the smallest door way over there, we have 15 Optimus prams that we use for our sailing school. We're pretty excited about getting this building built, and it's going to be a big addition, 4,000 square feet for our museum. One of the greatest things that we did this summer, in my estimation, we launched the SCIF programs, SKFF, Sail Kids for Free. We're taking kids, they come, these little kids, I mean, 6 years, 7, 8 years old, look at them down here on the wharf. They're just little tiny kids, and they come for a week sailing, a whole week of sailing course, each day, right through the week. They come, they don't know a rudder from a centerboard. They don't know how to rig these things. And we teach them. We teach them, here, this is Monday. They're down there learning how to put these boats together. We get a tether, a long line. We put it, each one has their own boat. They get out in their boat and they get out there, and we tell them how to steer and how to set their sails so that they get a little something out of it. Then we take the tether off and let them go around this basin here. By Tuesday, they really become sailors. By Wednesday, they're loving it. They're turning the boat over. They're learning how to right it if they get into trouble. And they're sailing off out into the outer part of the harbor. On Thursday, it's just great. They're just so enthused about the whole thing. By Friday, they're racing. They have a race around the buoys out there and come back. And the whole idea, of course, they get their neighbor in the next boat over. And the first thing they have to do is beat them, outsail them. If they can't do that, run into them, anything that works, you know. And all week long, by the time they get done the week, they're so enthused, they want to come back again. We're way oversold because this is a free course, free course for these kids. And we did 60 kids last summer, only half a season because of the epidemic. We only had half the season to work with, but we still put 60 kids through the course, and we had 60 more waiting to try and get in. So this year, I think we're going to try and do the same kind of a program over again, and we're going to have a lot more participants, a lot more kids. You take these kids out there, they get so excited about sailing these little tiny boats, they forget about their telephones. You wouldn't believe it. And it's all sponsored by the Sail Power and Steam Museum. We try and raise money for this program. We say, give us $100 and we'll put 2 kids for a whole week through that program, you know, and we'll double it each time. Use this $500, but it's 10 kids, that's a whole class. And we'll put them through a week sail training. And keep your eye on the SKF, join the SKF and it'll be great.
No. You can just wait a minute. Let me turn off this. Okay.
Somebody have a question? No? No. Okay. So that's the latest thing we did. It just makes me warm and fuzzy all over just to see these kids get out there and learn to be captains. Well, we're going to start in on the Roseway now. Schooner Roseway, amazing vessel, as I say, almost a century old. She's had 4 careers. Her very first career was as a fishing yacht. The two of those don't seem to go together too well. You think of a fish vessel, you think of fish scales and gurry running down the deck. And yachts, you think of fancy bright work and all of that. Well, I think that the reason it was a fishing vessel was for tax purposes. And the reason she was a yacht was for Harold Hathaway. Harold Hathaway had this vessel built in 1925. And he had a girlfriend named Rose. He was a lawyer, and he had this very close friend, mistress. Oh, I don't know about that, but a very, very good friend named Rose. And Rose, to Mr. Hathaway, always seemed to get her way. And everybody said, Rose Way gets her way with Hathaway. So that's the way they named the vessel the Roseway. That was her first career as a yacht. Her second career, of course, she was 32 years as a pilot boat off of Boston Harbor. The number 1 pilot boat up here is the original pilot boat built for the Pilot Association. The Roseway was bought by the Pilot Association. She became pilot boat number 2. Out there, summer, winter, raise hell in the dead of winter, the gales of wind, all kinds of weather. She was out there day and night on station, guiding big vessels in. Her third career, of course, she was a Windjammer. For 24 years, 12 years we had her as a Windjammer in Camden, and for 12 years George Sloan had the boat underway down to the Caribbean and back, Caribbean in the wintertime and the coast of Maine in the summer. And her fourth career, she became a school ship for the World Oceans Classroom, and here she is in Boston Harbor I forget the date of that, but that's 2007. How's that? I think that's about right. Anyway, that was the Roseway's career. She was built out of the gene pool of the great Gloucester fishing schooners. She was built by the James Yard in Essex, Massachusetts, just like the great big Gloucester schooners, the Puritan and the Tebow and all the rest of them. November 24th, 1925, she was built and maintained to an exceedingly high standard. She was built of oak gotten from the forest down in Taunton that belonged to Mr. Hathaway. He cut the oak down there. It was blue white oak, they called it, very, very quality oak. And of course, they built that vessel in the same style as they did all these beautiful vessels out of Gloucester. Look at her, and tremendous shear that she had there. She was the brat of the family there. She was fussed over and spoiled rotten. She had, look at her topsides gleam. She was varnished all over. Decks are varnished. Everything on that vessel was done to the nines. She was so spoiled, they even washed the coal to put it in the bunker so it wouldn't have any soot in it. They didn't want any soot to invade the galley down there. Here, the uniform crew that Mr. Hathaway had. Every crewman was just top-notch, first class. Everything on that vessel was first class. Look at the jumbo boom there with the varnish on it. And, well, as I say, the vessel was just, had every consideration. They sometimes use it for work. Here's a picture of the old captain over here on the right. He doesn't have his necktie on. You can bet Mr. Hathaway and his party, they weren't aboard on that trip. But they, of course, when the owners were there, it was something else again. They in deference to the sword fishing, that she was supposed to be a sword fisherman, they did have a pulpit out on the end of the bowsprit there. You can see in the left picture. And although they didn't do very much fishing, when they did do fishing, they went out one day in 1934 and caught 74 swordfish. I'd never seen that edited anywhere. I never saw it in a magazine or anything, but that was the rumor at that time. So she did fish just to justify her existence, I'm sure. Treated with every consideration. In the wintertime, they put a house over her to keep her varnish bright. And she was a regular figure around Boston. They always had a couple of dories on deck just to prove that she's a fishing schooner like the dory trawlers were. She went through her career with Mr. Hathaway. Mr. Hathaway, as a lawyer, apparently got in a little trouble. I'm not sure if it was with the IRS or what, but rumor has it that he was disbarred from the law profession there for a period of time during his career. 1941, perhaps that was the time, I don't know, but the vessel came up for sale. And the Boston Harbor pilots became interested in it. They took a hard look at that vessel and they bought it. They delivered it December 7th, 1941, a date that lives now in infamy. That was when the Roseway became a pilot boat out of Boston. They took the mainsail off of it and they put the riding sail on, made a few changes, put the cabin over the wheelhouse. They said that she was so well constructed and perfectly capable of withstanding on the battering and the heavy seas and the onslaughts of gales that they have on the everyday station out there in front of Boston, 10, 15 miles offshore out in the deep water. And it's a lonely vigil out there, the Boston Harbor pilots. But the Roseway was a really great vessel for it. Interestingly enough, her first job, or one of her first jobs, was the last square rig vessel to enter Boston Harbor, the Abraham Ryberg. She came full sail up over the horizon, saw the pilot boat, and of course she furled all her top hamper and hauled her courses up. And she was going along under just lower topsails, and they're still making 6 knots. You can see the bow wave around her stem there. And the pilots went out with the apprentices rowing their yawl boat. They'd call that a yawl boat. That they would deliver the pilot out to the vessels coming into the harbor. And there's the pilot sitting in the stern sheets. You can see he's a little bit heavy, keeping the stern down. And the Roseway is behind the American flag. You can see her mast sticking up there. But that's one of the first vessels they brought into Boston Harbor. And of course, the war started right away. And being in the war, they were appointed first Naval District on watch out there in Boston Harbor. They had 50 caliber machine guns aboard and were taught to use them. And they went through the war. Of course, you can see her bowsprit there. And that time she had a bowsprit, but they soon got rid of the bowsprit. Interesting story there. They were off station. The other pilot boat, the #1 pilot boat, which was the pilot, she was on station. Roseway was tied up at the head of the Boston Fish Pier, right up in the notch, right up at the end of it, where there's a stone wall ahead of them, cement wall ahead of them. Well, they had a little party. They were going to take a party out on a little harbor cruise, kind of a publicity thing. So the pilot got aboard, getting ready to run, and the apprentices came and took the lines off. And the engineer came aboard. Well, it was his time off, and the engineer, he liked to imbibe a little bit. So he had this little bulge in his pocket. He went down below and started the engines up, and he took a little nip from the little flask he had in his pocket. And he waited, and the engines warmed up. He waited, and finally the pilot reached over and he grabbed the telegraph. They had telegraph up into the pilot house at that time, and he put it in slow astern so that he could back out of the slip there. Well, with his left hand, the engineer pushed the telegraph into slow ahead. And up on deck, my God, the pilot looked over, the vessel started going ahead. Oh, this is terrible. He grabbed the telegraph, he pulled it all the way full astern. So the engineer put it full ahead. And the Roseway jumped ahead up to the stone wall. And of course, she put her bowsprit up over the caplog there. And the bobstay took charge. Bowsprit went through the fence. The bowsprit went into the window of a Volkswagen parked there and was picking up all the time because the bobstays were climbing up over that header on the top of the wharf. And it picked the Volkswagen right up off the ground. All 4 wheels. And one of the party on board says, "Hey, that's my car." Oh my God, the police came and they issued tickets all around. Very embarrassing time. And they decided from then on they would do away with the bowsprit. Of course, here the yawl boat's going over the side. That was what the apprentices do. Apprentices have to work 6 or 10 years before they can sit for a captain's license, a pilot's license, in order to become one of the pilots. It's usually through attrition. Somebody has to retire or die or whatever, and then they can move up. The yawl boats were all rowed with 8-foot oars and thole pins in the early days. Of course, you can see there there's no bowsprit on the number 2 pilot there anymore. And come the 1950s, they were able to get outboard motors and sometimes keep them running. And the pilots, of course, with an outboard motor, they get a little spray over the side. So the pilots all had to stand up in the boats so they wouldn't be sitting in a puddle of water going over to guide a big vessel in to Boston Harbor. Over on the left side there, you can see she still has her foresail with a gaff on it. And she has a staysail up ahead of that. Well, this is probably a good time to let you know about the storm, the worst storm that they recorded with the Roseway. They were out on station, 15 miles out in the deep water. Gale of wind came up, a raging gale of wind, a tremendous gale of wind, blowing 50, 60 knot. The vessel was rolling. They had to take all sail down. Of course, they were just holding her with their engines up into the sea, trying to keep her together. And she was rolling her rails under on both sides. Down she would go, back up she would snap, over, of course, without any sail on, nothing to protect her from the tremendous waves. And all of a sudden, the top of the mainmast broke off right at the hounds, right where the cross trees are there. You can see where the cross is. That's where, of course, the bibs and bolsters and all of the paraphernalia come together and is bolted into the mast. Well, it's a place where masts do get weak because the fresh water can get in there and it can rot and so on. It broke the whole top of that mast off. Now that top of that mast is swinging back and forth. The lower part of the mast is unsupported. It wasn't very long before that broke off on the deck and went right over the side. In the meantime, that spring stay that went across to the top of the foresail, the foremast, was still in place, and the backstay was still in place, and that masthead, weighing a half a ton, was snapping back and forth with every roll of the vessel. Bang, bang, back and forth, and the backstay would hook down underneath the pilot house. They thought they were going to lose their steering and have the whole pilot house torn off the deck. My God, they had to do something. They had to get over to the hand, get behind the breakwater there and get a little lee, get out of this mess. So they turned away, and just about that time, the foremast broke off at the deck. So the whole rig came crashing down on deck. The foremast lay over the side, still the shrouds on her and so on. She was like an outrigger sticking out over, I believe, the starboard side. They turned and they headed for Nahant under power as fast as they could get there, but they couldn't go very fast with the sea running there. And when they got into the shoal water, every time she'd roll down to starboard, that mast would go down and drag on the bottom, and it would roll her right around sideways. So they couldn't steer, and they had to wait until she rolled back up again so they could steer. Finally, they get into Nahant. Finally, they got their anchor down, and a Coast Guard helicopter came out and picked all of the men off of the vessel. They just left her to her own devices there and figured, well, she either survive or she'll drag ashore and be a total wreck. Well, about an hour later, the wind went down and she lay there to her anchor, just as neat as could be. So then they took the vessel back and into Boston, and they had to re-rig her. Now they decided they would rig her just like pilot number 1, the pilot. Pilot number 1 doesn't have any sails on the foremast, only has the staysail on the main and her riding sail. So they did the same thing. They went to Pigeon Hollow Spar Company. The Pigeon Hollow Spar Company had a 120-foot bed lathe, and they made new masts for it. They made my new mainmast for the Adventure, 92 feet long, and they had a lathe that could crank out any of this stuff. So they made 2 short masts for the Roseway because they didn't need them any bigger than what the rigging was. The rigging was still good. They salvaged all that. And they just took those masts and they put an upside-down bucket form-fitting over the top of the mast. Oh, beautiful. Great heavy steel buckets. And they had tangs on the side of them where the rigging would bolt on, would shackle on. So it was a very, very strong arrangement and really good for the mast because the water could never get into the top of that mast. Now she'll never rot, and those masts will last a long, long time. Very strong stays on it. Looks kind of funny being that short of a rig, but they knew it was safe. So that's the way they rigged her up, and they got her to look like the pilot number one. Here they are bringing one of the cruise ships in, the Vulcania, and the pilots are still doing their thing down there. So from 1973, it was the end of the pilot era. And 32 years, she was the very last pilot boat on the East Coast. But they finally ended the era, and they sold her off to a consortium of men from Boston. Guys from Boston, they were going to take that vessel, they were going to swordfish her. They put a pulpit on the end of the bow there, and they rigged her up. They put bowsprit back in her. They put the booms and gaffs back on her. They still had the short rig in her, but that didn't matter. And they went out to go swordfishing. They dumped a lot of money into that boat. Of course, she's 32 years in the pilot business. She probably needed a lot of work, conversion down below and so on. Well, they got one swordfish. And they spent all this money and got one swordfish. So they were pretty discouraged. And I heard that from the grapevine. Well, now, if I can divert a little bit, I'd like to go back a little in time. Just about that time, I was between marriages, and I was suffering from depression. And I'd like you to know that there is just absolutely no medication that you can take for depression that would quell depression. There's no better thing you can do except go boat shopping, buy another boat. That is the best additive you can take. So I went boat shopping. I went down to Fairhaven, and I found this little tugboat. Look at this little tugboat, 50-foot tugboat with a Cooper Bessemer, 4-cylinder Cooper Bessemer in her, a pilot house, gorgeous pilot house, even stained glass windows in the boot heel of the pilot house. She was cute as a bug. I fell in love with her. I looked out, jumped on board. They had just moved a barge over with her, and the engine was still running. I was enthralled with that engine. Awesome, awesome boat. Ran over to her. I want to buy that. Oh, it's not for sale. It's not, we're going to use it. Oh, it's not. I ran over to the office. I said, hey, I want to buy that tugboat. No, we're going to take the engine out. We're going to put a different. No, don't take the engine out. That's part of her charm. You'll ruin it. You do that. I said, oh, we got to sell it to them. No, they're not going to sell it. Not going to sell it. I said, well, here's a check for $10,000 with my number on it. If you decide to cash that, call me and we'll make a deal. So I got back in my car and dejected. I went over to Gloucester. And I found the Roseway there. So I asked a couple of wharf rats on the dock, what's happening to the Roseway? Oh, they're in trouble. They spend so much money and they can't get a Coast Guard inspected and they can't do this, they can't do that. I went over to the office. I said, would the Roseway be for sale? And they said, well, yeah, could be. I said, well, what are you asking for it? And they told me, and I halved it, and then I halved it again. And they said, oh, no, we'd never entertain a thought like that. Never, no way, we'd never do that. I said, well, okay. I didn't have any money in the bank, but I wrote him a check for $60,000. And I put my number on it, and I said, I'll match this with another check just like it if you'll sell me that boat. And I got in my car and I went back to Camden, dejected, downtrodden, depressed. And I no sooner got to Camden than they called me from Fairhaven and said, hey, you just bought a tugboat. I said to John Nugent, my God, come on, John, let's go down and get that tugboat down in Fairhaven. So we went down, we got on the tugboat, we got cursory instructions for the engine room. And we started out, we got in the Cape Cod Canal and the radio came blaring through, Tug Wrestler. I answered it, you just bought a schooner over in Gloucester. Oh my God, well, let's go over to Gloucester and see what we bought. So John and I went and stopped into Gloucester and signed a bunch of papers. We got in the tugboat. Now this is January of 1975, January, colder than Greenland. We went up offshore back to Camden with that little tugboat. We had to break ice in order to get in and tie her up. And there she had shed most of the ice that we had on the trip up. We could barely see out the pilot house windows. We were so iced down. And it was cold. Oh my God, it was cold. Well, I got back to my partner in Camden, and partner is Orville Young. We were partners in the Stephen Tabor for 10 years, and for a total of 25 years we were partner. We never had a piece of paper. We never had a signature on anything. We only shook hands, and that's the way we did business. He was a wonderful guy, absolutely wonderful. Down Easter, great guy. And the other little curly-headed kid there is Alan Talbot. He's now Captain Alan Talbot. He came through the hawsepipe when he was 15 years old and helped do bunks and clean up on the weekends on the Stephen Tabor, and was with us ever since. His whole family worked for me, great family. Anyway, I said to Orville, I just had a chance to buy the Roseway, Orville. Will you take her next time? He said, oh, yeah, sure, we'll do it. We shook on it. And then this is what Camden looked like in 1975 after we got the boats in here and spring started to spring. Here over on the right there is my little tugboat, the Wrestler, and behind the Schooner Adventure going on for half a mile. And behind the Adventure is the Roseway. You can see her black hull there and her black mast sticking up in the air with the flat tops on them, the way the mastheads were cut off. And over in the slipway, there's the Bowden with the ice barrel up on her foremast. You can see her all covered over for the winter. And then the Stephen Tabor there, and behind the Stephen Tabor is the Columbia, Bud Hawkins pie boat that he had. An awful lot of old rotten wood smeared all over Sharp's Wharf and the head of Camden Harbor. You can hardly see any docks in there for the vessels. And here in the foreground is Phil Rain's old lobster boat, the Bog Onion, and his little skiff that he used to call Tain't Much. And he, of course, was a town figure on the waterfront in those days, 1975 in Camden. Well, we got together, Orville and Alan and I and the crew, the Talbot family, and Captain Erland Quinn there and his best bib and trucker. And we decided how we were going to fix the Roseway up and make a Windjammer out of her. And in 3 months, we did our accommodation all over, put cabins in her for all the Windjammer passengers, piped her engine room up, piped all the bilge accessories up, got the Coast Guard down there. We got her approved, and in 3 months we were ready for the 1975 season. We ran her that very first season with a short rig in her, and I forgot they had vandals down in Boston when she was down there, and Gloucester, and they came into the sail locker. They had a vendetta against the guys down there with their sword fishing endeavor. And they vandalized the mainsail. They took a knife to it and cut it all up. And there's Nat Wilson down there in his shop in East Boothbay, sewing up that old sail, the old dirty beat up sail that we had to use that first year. Well, of course, we did it. We used it, and that was that. The next year, of course, we wanted, over the winter, we got her all gussied up, fitted out with a brand new set of sails. We put mastheads on her. We got the masts the proper height, and we got the sails the proper height, and we put a topsail on her, and we got ready for what was coming, which was Operation Sail, the first Operation Sail. Well, in spite of the fact that Orville, such a great captain he's over the bar now. Unfortunately, we lost a great man. But he took these people out, whether they had small sails or big sails, it didn't make any difference. Look at every one of those passengers, 35 of them. They have such a great big smile, ear to ear on their face, they could almost swallow their head. They're just all happy as a clam. Orville had such a great down east sense of humor, and he charmed everybody that went with him. So we did everything the old-fashioned way. We always set sail by hand. We never used the electric windlass that the Roseway was equipped with. We never told the passengers about that, but we set sail and we decided to head off for Operation Sail. This was the 200th anniversary of the Revolutionary War, 1776 to 1976. 1976, yeah. And we put a pine tree on the foremast head, representing the pine tree state. We went down, and with all the rest of them, I got to get going here. I'm using up a lot of time. Behind this big barking team was the Roseway. We went up through the gang of people. We did 5 of these different op sails, 5 of them, 2 of them in New York City, 2 of them in Boston, and 1 of them in
Wayne and I and our two daughters sailed on the Roseway. It was our first schooner trip in 1994. And on that trip was a man with his adult daughter. I think he was a widower. And his daughter was developmentally disabled. And he was so kind to her. She did painting, and she painted T-shirts and sweatshirts of the Roseway. I still have it. I'm going to stand up. I put the back on the front. I want you to see it. And we paid something like $25 for it. But the father said, we got it several weeks later. She went home and painted it. Can you see it?
Oh my gosh. Nice.
Her name is at the bottom, Mina. But look at the back is actually the front. I'm going to turn around. She used so much paint.
Wow.
Wayne said he thought it was Castine. We can't remember which port we were in, but I'll never forget that dad and how loving he was to his daughter. You could hear them in their cabin at night talking.
When was that sweatshirt done?
1994.
94. That's great.
Yeah, and Wayne still got his hat.
Oh. You guys got dressed for the event. Good for you.
Hey, yeah, we're celebrating. This is our social life. Yay.
Oh my God. The best laid plans of mice and men, you know. Well, at least you didn't hear all the bad words I had to say, did you? Look at the marks on that. I'll be darned.
Thank you for sticking with us, everybody.
Yeah, thank you very much. Shall we continue on now?
You're on.
Well, there we're greeted by the fireboat, and for the reception, the great parade of big sailing vessels up Hudson River, and of course these great training ships with all their crew and all their squaresails and everything. Just a gorgeous parade of most magnificent sailing vessels ever congregated at that event in New York City. They had fireworks at night that were spectacular, all kinds of lights. This is my crew. I'm not sure whether that was that trip or not. This is one of the Roseway opsail crews anyway. And there's the Roseway off to another opsail. I don't remember which one that was, maybe Halifax anyway. But we were looking at this profile picture that day, and we looked at her stem. You look at her stem, and it's kind of plain. It's kind of straight down there, and doesn't have that beautiful spoon bow that the Gloucester fish boats have. But we thought we ought to dress that up a little bit. So Orville said, I'll carve an eagle for it. So I said, gee, that'd be great. So we started to take measurements of it. Before I change this slide, though, I want you to notice that bobstay chain down there, the chain that comes up to the end of the bowsprit. And you can see that chain comes right to the end of the bowsprit. And if that chain isn't there, all of the weight of all these sails and everything is on that bowsprit, and it would immediately break off and all these masts would lay down on deck if it weren't for that chain. Just remember that for a few minutes. Orville went and got this great big piece of pine out of his woodlot, and he took that winter, and he built this eagle for under the bowsprit of the Roseway. And roughed it out, of course, in his shop there. And then he got his chisel out and he started doing feathers. And he did feathers and feathers and feathers, day after day after day. He did feathers and more feathers, till he finally got that eagle carved out and painted, gilded with gold, and put underneath the bow of the Roseway. There's always a little adjustment that has to be done, you know. So, of course, he went down there. They're underway. I don't know, maybe Captain Allen Talbot had the boat then, and he's down there adjusting. Anyway, finally got it finished, and it certainly did a great job of making the Roseway's bow some elegant. We have that eagle now in the Sail Power Steam Museum, world famous Sail Power Steam Museum, if you want to inspect it up close. Now you remember what I was talking about, that bobstay chain there. We went around Turtle Head this day, rip snorting southwester, a real hatful of wind. We were having so much fun, two of us sailing real close to each other. I'd come up under his lee, then I'd go around and pass him on the other side and pass him back and forth. And both of us had a scupper breeze. There was water on the deck coming in and out of the scuppers. So, you know, it was a good, darn good breeze of wind. We were beaten back to Camden on a Saturday. Well, we got into Camden, took our sails down, tied up to the dock, had our passengers go ashore, said goodbye to everybody. And I was sitting up on the rail up forward, looking down at the Eagle on the Roseway's, under the Roseway's bow. And I looked at that bobstay chain, that one single chain down there. And I looked at one of the links. Now that two chains there now, but when I looked at it, there was only one chain there. And one of those links right in the middle of that, under the head of that Eagle, was open about 1.5 inches or 2 inches, like that. That chain link had failed. And we were sailing those vessels as hard as we could sail them all the way up the bay that morning, about 4 hours beating back to Camden. And it must have done it very late in the 10, maybe just before we quit, I don't know. But God protects. So the very next time we hauled the Roseway, we put another chain plate down on her stem and doubled that chain. God, what would have happened? Those masts would come down on those people's heads, and I'd never gotten out of jail. There's the Roseway, of course, her red sails. She was always a beautiful sight in Penobscot Bay. Handsome, handsome vessel. That came I won't go into this. This is a making of the movie Captain Courageous. That's Captain Orville Young with his beard, looked like Abe Lincoln with that beard. And we used to have to tow the adventure down to Rockland, where we would pick up the actors and take them aboard there, and then we'd set sail and we'd go offshore. Carl Malden was our captain, and he was so seasick he couldn't see straight. They couldn't act. 4 days we took them out there, and they couldn't act. They didn't have enough fog in Maine. They had to make their own fog, so they had a fog machine on this tugboat. And there's the Roseway and the Adventure side by side, doing the movie. Movie Captain Courageous in 1977. And continuing on, the Roseway was a wonderful vessel. Everybody was quite pleased with both with the way she sailed and the accommodation that we had on her. Orville Young built this seine boat so that everybody could row themselves ashore, go into the lobster bakes and things like that. More opsail events. My two boys would grow up and they would go with us on the opsail trips as well. And then after 6 years, Orville's wife started to ail a little bit, and he decided he would like to sort of back up a little bit. So we got Captain Alan Talbot. He came and took over in 1982, took over the Roseway. Are you out there, Al? You can unmute if you want to, Al. And
yes, I'm here.
Good.
I'm here, Jim. Yep.
Good. Alan was probably the youngest Windjammer captain in the whole fleet in Maine. I've never heard of one any younger. You were what, Al? 21?
Well, when I started with the Bowden, I was 21. Yes. Yep.
Oh, with the Bowden, you started at 21.
Yes. Yes.
And that we were running her as Windjammer. You were with the Bowden 3 years?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. And then you were with the Roseway until we finally had to sell her off in 1988, right?
That's correct. Right.
Yeah. So there, the Roseway was a beauty. Alan kept her up just magnificently, sailed her beautifully, and everybody respected him. And the only thing was she was a little slow. She'd be going along there and we'd be passing. You could see the water boiling out under her stern. She still had the propeller on her that she had when she was a pilot boat. It was a 5-bladed, 5-foot propeller. So I thought, God, we got to do something about that. So what did we do, Al?
Well, much to Orville's chagrin, Orville really wasn't for it. But between the two of us, we convinced him that we ought to have this folding prop that, as I recall, Paul Luke had built a 3-foot folding prop for somebody, and the deal had fallen through. So we were able to purchase it. And that, I don't remember what spring it was. It must have been 283 or 84, I think. And during the haul out, we had to haul the shaft and have that turn to fit that wheel, and we put that wheel on, and it was just unbelievable the difference in the vessel. It changed the whole vessel, that folding prop. And you were no longer able to always pass me, Jim.
Braggart.
And the other thing that first summer we had it, as I recall, and my memory fails me a little bit these days, but we won the schooner race that year, that in our class.
And here's a picture of it. Beating the other boats in. Now you call that a folding propeller. It was an automatically folding propeller. If I remember right, it was hinged so that when you would put it in neutral and have a little way on, the blades would come to a neutral position so they didn't have any drag on them.
Right.
And
They feathered out, so the edge was going through the water.
Right.
And then when you put her in gear, you would always hear this. You hopefully always heard it go clunk as those blades spun on the hub and went back into the position.
And they would come out into the position to give you thrust. And
Yes.
coming into the harbor, when you were coming into the dock, you always tried it once or twice on the way in, didn't you?
Yes, because if she failed in reverse, then I probably ended up on the in the public landing there. So we always give it, out by the yacht club somewhere. I always tried it. So
We'd make a monument out of it.
that's right.
Well, that's great. And I love the way she sailed in those days, gave me a little competition. Well, the seasons rolled on by and time went by and winters came and winters went. We had our last opsail trip down in New York. This was a dedication to the Statue of Liberty. We had the same position. Going up Hudson River with all the big square rig ships and so on. Every time I took the Roseway on one of these 2-week opsail trips, Captain Orville Young would come over and he'd run the adventure for me. There's my galley crew and my deck crew for the opsail trip. But Maine's the place for the Roseway. I mean, Maine is just such a wonderful place to sail. Look at Penobscot Bay, all shimmering. That's one of Neil Parent's pictures. Neil Parent took the greatest pictures on these windjammers. And there we are, anchored with the little pine islands all around. What could be more beautiful than the state of Maine? Reflections everywhere. And time went by. The Coast Guard came down on the adventure. She was 60 years old and she needed some rebuilding, and they decided that they were going to limit her activities. And the times were changing. Orville was changing his direction, and Alan Talbot was going off in another direction. So we decided we would put the Roseway up for sale. And in 1988, there's the way both vessels were at the dock, and when we got ready to put the for sale sign on the Roseway, and I was going to donate the adventure. Well, that's when George Sloan came along, George and Leslie Sloan. George, are you there? Unmute, George, and join me.
Yes, I am here.
There you go, George. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
You just put yourself a whole peck of trouble there, didn't you?
Oh yeah.
What on earth possessed you to do a thing like that?
Well, actually, I had my eye on a gold-plated charter yacht, but my surveyor convinced me that I really should be looking at a Windjammer instead. And so to make a long story short, I finally partnered up with Steve Gold, and I came up in, I believe it was the fall of '87, took a ride on the schooner, and I think Alan will remember that. He told me that, they didn't think we were ever going to buy the boat. But as a matter of fact, I think you told me that if I didn't buy the boat, I was going to have to pay for the trip. That's pretty typical of Jim Sharp. But anyway.
I'm surprised I didn't charge you for it anyway.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So anyway, I finally partnered up with my partner, Steve Gold, who was another boater and aficionado, and he had a license, I had a license, and we figured, well, we can, I think Steve is here. Is he not? Are you there, Steve?
Steve is on here, yep.
I'm here.
Very good. Well, butt in if you want to.
Well,
Maybe I'll find the spot.
yeah,
All right.
tell us about,
So anyway, we finally took possession of the Roseway April 1st of '88. Started the outfitting, and the reason the Roseway really was suitable for us was we wanted to operate year round, and we felt that the vessel was certainly up to going to the Caribbean, which is where we were headed, and so that's what we did ultimately. Of course, we had the Windjammer seasons in Maine during the summer, but then come fall, we would head down to the Caribbean, and we did, I think we did 12 seasons down there as well. So it's quite an adventure, and we had a bunch of them on the way.
well, tell me some of those adventures you had offshore there. We have one picture here of Leslie, and she doesn't look too happy.
Yeah. No, you only wish that was Leslie up there.
No, I mean,
Yeah.
a little later on, we'll show you Leslie with the sea running beside her.
No,
Yeah.
I think that one's Sally Lane. But anyway, go ahead. Yeah, this
Well,
picture on the left here was, if you want to hold back for a second there, that one
Yeah, sure.
on the, yeah, if you can go back for a second. Yeah, that one there is a shot that a friend of ours took. We were sailing up the Francis Drake Channel in the BVIs. And one thing about the Caribbean is you can pretty much always be guaranteed of a good breeze of wind. And of course, that's what the Roseway loved, was a good breeze of wind. And so, as I said, that's where we had a friend in a yacht, and he got into his Zodiac and got down under the bow there and took that shot. And that's one of our crew on the right there going up to furl the topsail. I can't tell you who it is. Might have been Sean O'Connor. I guess he's probably not on tonight, but anyway, he was a great hand, and I know Alan knows Sean, and so he was a great guy in the trestle trees. He loved to get up there and do the topsail.
well, there's the gang.
Yep. Well, one thing I was going to say too is that probably one of the things that made these, well, our tenure with the boat was the crew. We always had great crews. I think Leslie and I figured out we had maybe at some point somewhere in the neighborhood of 75 or 80 crew members over the years, and we still stay in touch with some of them. And actually, down on the left there, right on the bob chains, is Tim Rice. And just a little quick aside, I was running tugs down in New York a couple of years ago, and I got a phone call, a radio call on the two-way radio one night about 11:30. And lo and behold, it was Tim, and he was running as a second mate on a big yacht up there. He happened to be moored up in the harbor there in New York, and heard us on the radio. He said, I'd recognize your voice anywhere. So anyway.
And the one over on the right there, John McBride, you don't get a much higher guy than that.
No, John and Jana were really great. They got us started off on our first season, and actually worked with us a couple of seasons, as I recall.
Yeah.
And John was indispensable as mate, and Jana, of course, a great cook, and she did a great job in the galley. So
Yeah, John worked for me, a mate on the Adventure too. He's on our final trip down to Gloucester.
mhm.
Great
Um,
fellow.
You know,
Yeah.
George, let me jump in for a second. One of the
Sure.
things about, all those terrific crew members that we had is that now, still being here in Camden, it's like several of them are still here. John and Jana here. Sally Lane actually moved back to Camden.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
I didn't
and several
realize it.
others. But not only that, they now have kids that are like in college, some of them. And it's sort of like your grandkids.
Yeah, it's the scary thought.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure Jim has experienced that, to see them, grow around here from, little kids running around on the boat once in a while, and then all of a sudden they're off to college.
Yep. That's
Well, Steve, one of the things that I always think about, I reminisce about this a lot. Of course, being at the point where we are now is, I guess we could be classified as old. You kind of think back on what, what you've done over your life. And I think one of the things that has stood out to me is the fact that if you and I hadn't bought that boat, there were a number of people that came to the boat because of our ownership, and it virtually changed their lives. You know, I mean, they met people that they married, and they have kids, and you know, it's just it's a pretty interesting thing when you think about it.
Funny thing about those couples, they keep having kids.
Yeah.
There's the picture.
There's Sally. Yeah. And this trip, this was our first trip down to the islands, and we'd had a pretty nasty gale in the Gulf Stream the night before, or a couple of nights before, I guess. And here we are, steaming down the big rollers. We had a northwest gale on the stern, probably running 40 knots or so. And a good rule of thumb when you're offshore is you figure about half the wind speed for your wave height. So, and we had estimated here that we had probably 18 to 20 foot waves. And we were running wing and wing with just the, actually just the jib and jumbo. And I couldn't tell you exactly what we were making for speed, but probably a good 9 or 10 knots. I mean, that boat just flew along. And I happened to have a paying passenger on that trip, and the guy told me, this was before we got to Bermuda, he told me he was going to be getting off in Bermuda. And I said, why? He said, well, he said, I've gotten my money's worth now. He said, I have a 36-foot boat, and my wife and I were thinking about going to Bermuda, but he said, you've convinced me that I am not going offshore in a 36-foot boat. I said, okay, fine.
That isn't the bottle that you picked up at sea, was it?
No, that's an entirely different story. I was in the office one day, and I got a letter from a lady, and this was several years later. This photo here was probably 1988, fall of 1988. Well, some years later, I was in the office and I got a letter from a woman in the Bahamas, and I think she was on in the northern Bahamas. Anyway, she told me that she walked the beach every day, and this particular day she'd gotten a bottle, or she found a bottle on the beach, and when she opened it, I had a note in it. She opened it up, and it said something to the effect that this was from the crew of the Schooner Roseway, and they had no women, no beer, and they were in desperate conditions heading south to the Caribbean. Well, what was really interesting was that she thought it was really deja vu, because she said that she had once known a charter captain named Jim Sharp who owned the Roseway, and that she had had some kind of a relationship with him, and she wanted to know if he was still around and what have you. I remember I took the letter into your office, and you were
my wife
you fell out of your chair.
My wife just kicked me.
Talking, George.
Yeah, I know. Sorry, Meg. Didn't he ever tell you that story?
No.
She just kicked me in the ankle. Now I have to walk with a limp.
She didn't go into the details of what the relationship was, so I'm sure it was all on the up and up.
Well, I'm glad of that anyway.
Yeah.
Well, gee.
But she
There you
sure
go.
did. She brought some very interesting stories like that. So
Yeah.
yeah, and that I guess that's yours truly a year or two ago at the helm. And this picture over here on the right is actually a picture of a photograph that we have that Neil Parent took of the vessel under sail. And I can't tell you exactly when it was. It's a black and white, so I can't tell you the colors. I think it's probably when you folks still own the boat, but it's a great shot of her under sail.
Uh-huh. And
that, just a quick one, that's us going into the cut at Bermuda. And you can see we have a trysail furled up on the Maine. And I always like to sail offshore with a trysail, because we were ready for any kind of weather. And I know some people will sail under full sail, but that gaff and the main boom are so big and heavy that with a light crew, we would go with probably 12 people south, and with a light crew like that, it's an awful lot to handle. So after a couple of years, we got the trysail, and that really made a big difference when we were doing our offshore trips. And just quickly moving along, this shot on the left that's the south side of St. Thomas, and we would leave there on Monday mornings on a trip, and it was usually pretty sporty out there. You have the easterly trades at 15, 20, 25 knots, and you could pretty much depend on 4 to 5, 6 foot seas out there. And here we are down in the trough, but she's just beating to windward like crazy. And we could usually make the Christmas Cove cut there probably on 2 or 3 tacks. The Roseway did point pretty well to windward, and that was good. And then here's another shot of her just plowing through the waves, and all 250 tons of her. It's pretty incredible to see that, to feel it, be on the boat and to feel it just pushing through the waves like that. Nothing stopping it, really.
The coaster fishing schooners have a wonderful motion.
Yes, they did. And I can tell you offshore, I mean, this boat, Steve will I'm sure agree with me. I mean, you could, almost any conditions, if you were under sail or you had some sail up, that boat was as comfortable as you'd want it to be. And you could be going along in like I say, 4, 6, even 8 foot seas, and just it's like riding in a Rolls Royce, really.
That's right. Well, that's amazing.
I was always amazed on the ocean passages when it was really blowing. You'd be down below and you'd just be comfortable, and it'd be a pleasure cruise. And then you come up on deck and you go, oh my God, what's going on up here? You know?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Steve. It's true. I mean, you'd be just riding along, no noise, perfectly quiet. Yeah. And just say, oh, it's a nice ride. And then you get up and the crew's like, hey, what's going on here?
That's what the pilots thought. That's why they made her into the pilot boat, very comfortable in a seaway. Yep. Well, and 2000 came along. I guess the Roseway needed some work. And that was when you ended your career with her, eh?
Yeah, that's right. We unfortunately we had a similar run-in with the Coast Guard that you did, and they were just requiring too much work for us to handle financially. So the sad part about it is that our surveyor, Giffy Fall there, who actually wrote the Coast Guard wooden boat inspection guide, kept insisting that there were that the boat was sound, but the Coast Guard said otherwise, and they're the ones that determined what was going to happen. So anyway, yep, that's it. So 2000 was our last season sailing as a Windjammer.
Then she had a rebuild and went to the World Ocean School. They took on the project and did a total rebuild on her. And then by 2005, 2006, she was back sailing again. And in, of course, nonprofit, the World Ocean School, they're doing great things as a school ship now, right up to the current time. Eden, are you on?
I am, yes.
Hey,
Thanks for the opportunity.
Go, great. Well, we're anxious for you to tell us about the school and how it's going and all the great things you're doing with the vessel now.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. So I would be remiss if I started chatting about this and didn't highlight Captain Dwight Deckelman. He was really instrumental in the establishment of World Ocean School and the major restoration that happened, getting her back sailing and starting the program. And I think Captain Dwight is on this call. I thought I saw his name.
Dwight is on. Come on, Dwight, unmute.
I am here.
There he is.
So, but if I don't know, Dwight, if you want to say anything, but I just know that I surely wouldn't have been here, and I know that World Ocean School wouldn't be here if it weren't for him.
Well, I don't know how you guys took on such an enormous project like that. Laying over at the shipyard, I know she was in tough shape, and God, you guys tore all the pieces and got it all done, and now she's going to live to be 100.
It's the young and dumb story. Shopping when you're hungry. But no, it's hard to compete with you, Jim. Your stories you tell are incredible. And I've forgotten
some of them are even true.
I, I don't doubt that. I remember this from years past, and I'd like to just shout out for Orville. He was such a great man and inspiration to me, and I used to try every year to at least drop by his barn and catch him when he was out in the summer on his sitting there watching the cars go by. He was such a guy. And a non-schooner related story, I showed up in Maine in, I think in '93 and lived across the street from him. Had a little black truck that I did a burnout through an intersection. And Orville told me a story while I was in the lumber yard saying, I saw this guy, he was in a really big hurry doing a burnout through the intersection. And I looked at him. I said, "Oh, you got me there, Orville." But it was, I don't know. I had missed his passing, and he was a great man.
He was a great man. He sure was. Yeah.
But I hate to contradict you, but you can break the bob chain, and the rig will not come down.
Is that right?
I know that for a fact. In fact, I've broken the bob chain twice. Until I learned better. But Roseway is a magnificent boat. She, I think to sail her offshore is it's incredible. There is nothing that, it's incredible to sail.
Yeah. That's true of every gloucester fishing schooners are the quintessence. They are the fastest and most able vessels, and sea kindly, just magnificent boats. This I thought was a very interesting picture, Eden.
Yes, absolutely. So Dwight Deckelman and Abby Kidder are the founders of World Ocean School, and Abby had found this photo. Then the center of this photo is Abby as a girl. I believe it was for her grandparents' wedding anniversary, which she was on board. But you can see she wrote a log in her logbook. Abby's in the middle.
In the middle.
In the middle with the visor.
Yeah.
So
I didn't realize she had sailed with Orville back in those days, and it must have been some of the last trips that Orville took, because that's 1988, was it?
It's an 82. Yep.
82.
And
82,
her
yes.
remarks were it was a wonderful sail. So it was very coincidental, right? That as Dwight and Abby founded World Ocean School and went looking for a platform, that Abby had this history with Roseway, and so they undertook this incredible project, and as a result, when she was splashed in 2005, they went out to inspire students, and since then we've had an opportunity to work with over 21,000 students aboard Roseway in an array of programs, and really proud of the way the programs have evolved over the years. I'm actually going to send a link in the chat for a video. I know we're over time already, and so I won't bore you with the video, but you can, if you're interested, you can check it out. It's one of the programs that we run aboard Roseway. This one happens to be with high school students who've previously dropped out of Boston Public Schools, but we do a program for them where they can live aboard and become crew for 2 weeks, and it's an incredibly transformative experience. If you skip through,
you're doing amazing things with her. So great.
Thanks. Well, this is a shot of her, and actually, Dwight, maybe you can speak to this this state of things and your efforts in the restoration.
There was a lot to be done when we got her, and it was I think the pictures speak for themselves, and I think everybody here has probably followed those. We were fortunate enough to be able to do a complete rebuild of Roseway, changing her motors, which unfortunately led to the blowing up of the Luke feathering prop, which was a beautiful piece of engineering, but couldn't handle the torque of the motor. The Detroits only were, I think, maybe together 300 horsepower, if that, and then we put a 400 horse cat in it, and that was the end of that. which led to some exciting times docking and during its failure process. No, it was Roseway is an incredible boat. She's of all the just her ability to sail under big conditions is just amazing.
So, so here's some of the newspaper clippings from that restoration and the start of this incredible school from Dwight and Abby. And then if you'll skip ahead, I've included a couple of photos. Yeah, so here's, so really this was the launch of World Ocean School educational programming, and here are just a couple of photos of the programs in action. I noticed in the chat, Sam Phillips had commented on being a deckhand in 2009 and the best year of their life. So, and I can attest to that as well. I came on as a deckhand, never having sailed before in my life, and it was a transformative experience. And 12 years later, it's an absolute privilege to get to steward her on and continue these programs. So we really focus on, in addition to building in academics, but also team building and community building. Among our core values are communication. You skip to the next slide. We highlight some of our others. Obviously inherent is teamwork in the sail raising. These are mostly photos. Actually, all this in this slide are photos of our work in St. Croix in the US Virgin Islands. We run a handful of programs, some for 5th grade students where we align with national curriculum standards in math and science and history and language arts. And you see a couple of photos of high school students. We launched a Maritime Academy program for high school students to build career and technical skills to launch into the workforce. Here's some photos of our students in Boston. Trust is one of the other themes that we really focus on in our work aboard. These are mostly photos in the Boston area. We primarily do 2-week voyages where students are living aboard, similar to the link that I included in the chat. You can go ahead and skip to the next. And so self-worth is another big piece. As I mentioned, most of the students that we work with are from under-resourced communities, and the feedback they give us after a time with us is, I'm smart on board Roseway. I feel strong aboard Roseway, and this really understanding that, empowering them that they too can become crew, and this is something they never thought about or dreamt about before. And if they can do this, then they can do anything. So it's a pretty remarkable thing to see students thrive with. So as I mentioned, we've worked with over 22,000 students, and they've come from all over the globe and all over the US. We're primarily based these days between Boston and St. Croix. Those are our main hubs, but often do summer programs where students join us from all over the country. Here are some before and after shots that I think really capture the transformative nature of before they come on board Roseway. Not entirely sure what they're going to do, and once they get their hands on it, they've really changed their spirit changes. So you see this through this whole next series, which you can just flip through.
Changes their personality right around, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Unbelievable.
It is. Good, Jim, for starting the free sailing program. I think getting kids out on the water is, it obviously changed my life. Yeah. And I think that's an amazing program you have running up there. Well, I have I was running the prams, and it's great to watch him.
I just love it. They're their own captain. So we're going to take them, those little ones, and we'll send them down to you when they get big.
There we go.
Exactly. So yeah, this is a great opportunity for us to keep Roseway going and keep her history alive with some transformative programs. And we continue to do a major yard most every year, and are looking towards another pretty major restoration before her 100th birthday. So stay tuned for more details on that. But for any of you on the call, thank you very much for supporting World Ocean School, and we're really proud to keep her going and keep this history alive.
We're proud to see her keep going all the time. And now, of course, 2017, there was the parade of sail into Boston Harbor, and there's the Roseway right behind the Eagle. The Eagle, of course, is the first vessel in the parade. And then my other vessel, the Adventure, is the next one back there. So isn't that interesting? I'm proud that both of those vessels now are nearing 100, and both of them are still sailing. That's a great tribute. Gee, thank you very much, Eden, and thank everybody there. Do we have any questions? Does anybody have any questions they want to ask before we say our good nights?
Jim, George here.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd just like to underscore what Eden said about the kids, and I think that also goes for a lot of our crew. I mean, just getting back to the cruise again, I know that whole schooner experience, you know, the teamwork, the, you know, living as a group, all that sort of thing. I know it changed a lot of lives, and I know they've seen it with the students too. It's just, the sailing is just a tremendous experience for the young people, that's for sure.
Yeah, I agree with you, George. We had the very first trip I did on the Adventure. We had underprivileged boys from the state of Maine, a 2-week working cruise. They came aboard, they were inhibited, they didn't talk to each other. They were downcast, just like the kids that Eden showed us. And by the end of the 2 weeks, they were hugging each other goodbye and taking addresses from each other. They'd made real pals on there. And boy, some of them we really had lay into to try and keep them straightened out. But it changes people, it really does. So the World School, I think, is doing a fabulous job. And Eden, we take our hats off to you, that's for sure.
Thank you very much.
We have somebody here who commented too. Looks like you did some boat building with the kids at one point. Peggy Huckle says that World Ocean School had 4 Swampscott dories built by some of the students. And in 2015, you sold them off, and she has one named Rosie, is still going strong. So.
Great, great. Any other questions? Jump right in.
Hi. Oh.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make a quick comment.
Yes.
Hi, my name's Sally Lane, now Lane Smith, and I was on the crew with George the first year that he had the boat, and it was transformative. And I'm very grateful for the opportunity and to work on deck, and it's made a big change in my life. Lots of good friends and great sailing since, so I'm very appreciative. And I love to see what the World Ocean School is doing now too. That's pretty awesome.
Yes, and I want to butt in here. Sally, I remember your dad got in touch with me and said, you know, I hope you know what you're doing. This girl doesn't even know the right end of a screwdriver.
Yeah, he was right.
But you learn quick.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's it. You learn hands-on. It's the way to go. It's fantastic.
Jim, can you chime in again? Somebody's asking who built Roseway, and
it was the John James Yard in Essex in 1925. They built the finest Gloucester fishing schooners. The Story Yard and the James Yard were the 2 most producing yards in Essex. They built literally thousands of these kind of vessels. The Adventure was built next in line. The Roseway built from that fine oak down in Taunton, and the next keel they lay was the Adventure's keel, and she was launched in 1926. So the 2 vessels have kind of a kinship, and now they're still sailing. 2 weeks, we're going to do the Windjammer Angelique, and we hope to have all the captains of the Angelique, from Mike Anderson, who had the vessel built in the beginning, all the way down through Mike McHenry and so on, down to Dennis Gallant, who worked for me on the Sail Power and Steam Museum for a number of years, and he'll be on telling us all the ins and outs of the Windjammer Angelique. Then every 2 weeks we'll have a few more, and we'll be announcing as they develop.
And you can always check. You can always check on our website. One of the pages is a calendar page, And we have everything listed there. You can also, if you've missed one of these, you can also connect to one of the tapes of them. We have them on YouTube. So Bowden and Adventure and Stephen Tabor are already up. And this one will be up in a few days as well. So if you know anybody that missed it, you can pass them along to the link.
We thank Camden National Bank for helping us out with this. They gave us quite a little contribution here so that we can upgrade our equipment, so maybe we won't lose power in the middle of it. My apologies for that mistake. But anyway, I guess it all turned out pretty well in the end. Happy New Year to everyone. Stay healthy. Come back and see us again at the world famous Sail Power Steam Museum.